Okay, how many people do we have? I wonder.
We can tell pretty quickly here.
And
Good 21.
wow, that's great. Okay, time to start.
Yes, let me go find your description here. Okay. Welcome, everyone. I would like to invite you to join me you might want to mute well, you are muted. My name is Sandra Squires. I'm the secretary of the board of the Episcopal Women's History Project. We're delighted that you're here today. And I will start out with the reading of the Women's Prayer. O God, creator of all life, bless the unsung lives of countless Christian women in every century who were your hands and feet, who kept alive your compassionate presence by feeding the hungry, nursing the sick, clothing the naked, comforting the sad, praying and petitioning, strengthening those in prison, teaching the stories, sewing and singing, weeping and rejoicing. Grant us this wisdom to discern our ministries in this day as our foremothers found theirs. Lead us in new and timeless forms of worship, of discipleship, and let us joyfully find our place in this procession of praise, offering our varied gifts and voices together with them and Mary, the mother of our Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
I have a special honor today to invite you to one of those people who's going to talk about one of our foremothers. And this is Dr. Julie Garbus. She holds her Ph.D. in English from the University of Texas at Austin. She's currently teaching English as a second language to refugees and immigrants. She has worked as an English professor and an author of educational materials. She's writing a biography of Vida Scudder, and she's deeply thankful to the EWIP board and the grant that would enable her to travel to Massachusetts to conduct research for the Scudder book. And I'm so excited that she's going to be with us today. This is a woman that many of us have heard of, but don't know much about. And Julie's going to fill in the blanks for that. So thank you for joining us. And I will turn it over to you, Julie.
Thanks so much, Sandra. And thanks, Liz, for being able to do all the technical stuff we need for this. And again, a big thank you to the Episcopal Women's History Project. Because of your grant, I could go from my home in Colorado to Massachusetts, where she lived and worked. I went to the Smith Archives, Smith College, where I could look at her college materials and her notebook, her journals, the first draft of her autobiography. It was marvelous. Then I went to Adelanrude, north of Boston, which is the retreat house for a lay order of Episcopal women called the Society of the Companions of the Holy Cross. Scudder helped found that and was instrumental in it for many years. And that archive has so many letters, hundreds of letters she wrote to people she sponsored to join the organization and about the different activist things the organization did, things I'd never seen before, no one has ever seen before. It was marvelous. So thank you so much. Okay. So first, okay, who was Vida Dutton Scudder? She, and I refer to her as Vida Scudder most of the time, or just Scudder, just because it's shorter. It's Vida because she was named after her father, David, and she was called Davida. So everybody called her Vida. There we are, Vida Dutton Scudder. And like I say, I'll call her Scudder most of the time. Okay, I call Vida Scudder the most influential progressive activist who no one has ever heard of, except for Episcopals usually, because she was an Episcopal saint and an Episcopal theologian and deeply influential in the church during her lifetime. She was an activist. She devoted her 92 years to working on behalf of the poor, recent immigrants who were very discriminated against. She was an inspirational professor. She taught at Wellesley College for 40 years, taught some courses, which I'll talk about, that were groundbreaking, and inspired hundreds of students to become activists in various ways. She wrote 17 books and about 200 articles, published in general interest journals and theological journals, published by big publishers. And she created a fusion in her writing of Christianity and what she called socialism. I'll talk about that. That was like the social gospel, which is something people have heard of, but somewhat different. People have called her the most influential woman theologian of her day in the Episcopal Church. She might have been the most influential theologian, period. She also was active in the church. Now, at that point, women couldn't speak to the General Convention. Of course, they couldn't be ministers until 1976, which is too bad because she would have been a great minister. She would go to the General Conventions. She would speak maybe across the street and draw many, many people. And she would push for committees and resolutions that furthered social justice. So she got a lot done. She just didn't get official recognition for any of it. I'll talk about that too. So I've talked about that. Oh yeah, membership in lots of other groups. I'll talk about those too. Okay. Actually, let me go chronological at this point. Scudder was born in 1861, the end of 1861. So when she was born, no light bulbs, no electricity. One of her first memories is her family's grief when they heard that Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated. Her family was religious, but not Episcopal. Her dad was a congregational missionary, sort of kind of strict Puritan congregationalism, not the United Church of Christ kind, which is my denomination. So she was born in India, where he was a missionary. When she was about a year old, he died trying to swim across an Indian river. She and her mom came home to Boston. She spent her childhood going back and forth in several year periods between Boston and Europe. And so it was an unusual childhood. In Europe, she became familiar with Catholicism in Italy, which she adored, both Italy and Catholicism. She saw great works of art. She read copiously. She didn't spend time with other people her own age. It was her and her mom. But that unusual childhood, I think, turned her into the unusual woman she became. She came back. She was a member of the first class in America to graduate from a college preparatory high school, a rigorous high school, very rigorous. And then she was a member of one of the first graduating classes at Smith College. At Smith, she discovered that she was an extrovert, made a gazillion friends who stayed with her throughout her life and helped her found settlement houses. After college, life became a dilemma. In 1885, when she graduated, women could go to college. A handful of privileged women did. Once they got out, their options were very limited. Many men did not want to marry college-educated women. They thought that they were too manly, and even that they had been rendered infertile by their higher education. Most careers were virtually closed to women, doctor, lawyer. Only a very few people would do that. She didn't want to teach K-12. So she fretted and was depressed, and that actually affected her life later. I'll talk about that. she didn't know what to do. She went to Oxford, England, to hang out and study. And there she heard the last lectures of the art critic John Ruskin, who had become an ardent social justice activist. He said, it is not fair that the poor are living terrible lives and they cannot appreciate works of art and their lives are so difficult. The rich are doing nothing. It is our responsibility as Christians to make this bad situation stop. It hit her like a thunderbolt. She uses that term in her memoirs. She came back determined to do something to make the world better, didn't quite know what. 1887, she did several things. She began teaching at Wellesley College, taught English. I'll talk about that. She was an inspirational professor. And one day, talking with her friends from Smith and other colleges, she came up with the idea for social settlements. Now, social settlements, most people know them from Jane Addams, who started Hull House, the famous settlement in Chicago. Scudder's group, the College Settlement Association, opened their first settlement 2 weeks before Jane Addams. So it's technically the first social settlement that was successful in the United States. So what settlements were essentially community centers run in very poor inner city areas by usually college-educated women. The idea was, we have privilege, we have education, we have influence, and we're going to share in the life of people who do not. We're going to dedicate ourselves to doing whatever they need to have a better life. So some of the things that settlements did were basic. They swept the streets and they lobbied for sanitation. They held clubs and activities for children, different ages, for adults, for boys, for girls. They taught some labor skills. They made playgrounds. They made banks because many people didn't have access to other banks. Some of them had bathing and showering facilities. They did a lot of helping people navigate the community. They would talk to people who needed to find a nurse or a doctor, or better housing, or a job, and they would get them connected. They also did a lot of lobbying to local and state governments to start providing these services. They lobbied for public schools. They lobbied for a lot for better conditions for workers, to end child labor, wages and hours becoming lower. So this group of mainly educated women did an amazing amount to create the world that we live in today, the country that we live in today. Okay. She started the settlement in New York City called Rivington Street. It was her idea. She was chair of the College Settlement Association, which was a group of her friends. She is the one who raised all the money for it through speeches and newspaper articles. She never lived in a settlement, and that pained her. She had her other job. Rivington Street in New York City, the first settlement, its most famous volunteer is Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt worked there before her marriage. Franklin Roosevelt was courting her at the time, and one time he went along with her to her friendly visiting to people's tenements, and he said, "My God, I didn't know that people lived like that." So Franklin Roosevelt credited that experience with inspiring the policies of the New Deal that changed so much for so many. So that's the settlements. It became extremely popular in the United States. I think there were hundreds within the next 30 years. At the same time as she got the idea for settlements, she became a professor at Wellesley College, which of course is another women's school. And at Wellesley, she developed some courses that I would argue are some of the first experiential learning courses in the country. The idea was this: she was incredibly charismatic, and students hung on her words, and she would encourage them to go work in the settlements. They would do so. They would come back. They would talk about what they had experienced. They would read books and articles relevant to settlement life. She taught the first socialism and literature course in the country. And so that experience of experiential learning in settlements and then reflection, it's what these days we call service learning or experiential learning. So it became kind of a big deal around about 1990. I have an article out saying she started it in 1900. As a professor, she was incredibly charismatic. And there are all sorts of great accounts of her speech and how the students did hang on every word. Okay, so we've got settlement founder, professor, Episcopal church activist. So Scudder began life as a strict Congregationalist. In Europe, she was exposed to Catholicism, seeing churches and hearing some Catholic preachers. The year she got to Rome was the year that papal infallibility was proclaimed, and it was a big deal. When they came back, her mother converted to Episcopalianism, and so Scudder did as well. She developed an Episcopal theology that became the absolute bedrock of her life. Her thought was that the Trinity, where Father, Son, and Holy Ghost are separate entities but also equal, should be the model for what life was like on earth. Many people with different races, ethnicities, identities, political beliefs, wealth levels, everybody separate should also be equal. And so she worked to further that. She also said, of course, that Jesus's actions and his words were, as she put it, profoundly unsettling to the mind if you read them closely, especially the Sermon on the Mount. So she took Jesus's words and actions as inspiration as well. Let me just check the time. Good. All right. So settlements, settlements, professor, theology, membership in groups. Okay, Scudder, as I said, worked behind the scenes at general conventions and other Episcopal venues to found groups, to push for resolutions, calling for peace, laborers' rights, many different social justice activities. She, and through the Society of Companions of the Holy Cross, she did a lot too. I should talk about the society. Okay, the Society of Companions of the Holy Cross, which still exists, is a group of lay Episcopal women who are committed to spiritual growth, peace, justice, community, prayer. And she was an early member of it and an inspirational member in that, well, for many reasons, but her job was, it was called Companion-in-Chief of Probationers. And what that meant was that when people were interested in joining the organization and through a process of becoming familiar with it and developing a commitment to it, she was their guide, Companion-in-Chief of Probationers. And in that capacity, she had people read all sorts of books like Marx and her own books. And she would write them long letters and encourage them to think about the relationship between religion and social justice. She, hang on, just thinking. So that was extremely influential. And when I was out there in Massachusetts, I was able to see the letters she wrote, and they were extraordinary. They are both captivating and warm and deep and inspirational, and they give a glimpse of what she must have been like in life. Okay, other groups. Besides the Society for Companions of the Holy Cross and the College Settlement Group, she was an early founder of the Association of Collegiate Alumni, which is now the American Association of University Women. She was a star speaker for a group called the Intercollegiate Socialist Society. She was an early member of the ACLU. She worked with Jane Addams as a peace activist for the Women's International League of Peace and Freedom. I think she said she belonged to something like 150 organizations. One of the other things she did within the church, which I'd love to write more about, was as the power behind the throne of a group called the Church League for Industrial Democracy, CLID. And what that was a group specifically to argue on behalf of organized labor. Oh, wow, I just saw a message about SCHC. Right, exactly. It's no longer just Episcopal women. Exactly. It was Episcopalians when she was part of it. I don't know when it became open to everybody. That's really cool. So she Church League for Industrial Democracy, they marched with strikers, they supported strikers. And at that point, it started in the later part of her career. And she was, when she was older and wasn't going to marches and strikes anymore, but she was the advisor of the people who did, and she kept that up until her death in 1954. Okay. She wrote 17 books. She wrote about 200 articles. They're novels, they're transcriptions of lecture series she gave to different Episcopal gatherings. Most of them are about what she saw as the responsibility of the church and its individual members to strive for fundamental changes. Some of them, the only book where she actually talks about herself is her memoirs. It's called On Journey. It's extraordinary. The way I got interested in Scudder was that I was given a chapter of them to read in graduate school. I stayed up all night reading the entire memoirs after that and became as fascinated with her as her students and her other disciples did in her lifetime. Okay. Talked about revolutionary. Sorry, I have a lot of notes here. I've talked about college and careers. So during the Progressive Era, which was about 1880 to 1915 or so, many people, usually women, college-educated women, worked very hard to create social reform. And settlement houses were a large part of it, but they also, in pushing local and state governments to formalize social change, they created committees, they held government positions. Frances Perkins, who was FDR's Secretary of Labor, was part of this group a little bit later. She knew Scudder. I'm pretty sure, wait, was she an Episcopalian?
Yeah.
No, she was. Was she SCHC? Society of Companions of the Holy Cross? She might have been. I'm not sure. But yeah, we know they knew each other, not SCHC. Excellent. Good to know. Good to know. Okay. Another companion here. Oh, wow. Oh, wow. I love Adeline Rood. Seriously, being there was one of the deepest spiritual experiences of my life, as well as one of the most amazing intellectual ones. My own background is I'm a New England Congregationalist from Massachusetts, and an active member of the UCC Church. So during the Progressive Era, Scudder was the archetypal activist. She was out there in the public sphere. She was making speeches. She was working in settlements. She was writing books. She was inspiring students. 1915 or so, when World War I starts, the government cracks down on free speech. People get worried about, the government became worried about communism. This is right after the Russian Revolution. And Scudder started getting investigated. She didn't shut up. She kept right on going, but her activities became a little more private. Settlements at the same time had become somewhat institutionalized. People weren't living there anymore. They were seeing themselves as social workers and not sharers of the life of the low-income people. So she became disenchanted with that. Okay, her version of socialism, which of course is a fraught word, it could mean all sorts of things, means all sorts of things to different people. It was she very much advocated the reforms that FDR put into practice, which we now call Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, strong laws regulating labor, laws against child labor. She advocated government ownership of utilities. She almost lost her job. Oh, yes. Okay, I can talk about that too. All right. So in 1912, there was a huge strike in Lawrence, Massachusetts among textile workers. And the strike was particularly notable and notorious because it was organized by the Industrial Workers of the World, otherwise known as the Wobblies, and they were seen as scary anarchist sabotage people, which is kind of exaggerated. But the Wobblies were good because since they were very good at organizing people from different races and different languages and whatnot, and that was what you needed at that particular strike. So Scudder went up there and she made a speech, and she based it in the Sermon on the Mount. She said, if you look at this, it shows that we need to support the strikers. I think I have a biography right here. Let me read you exactly what she said. Let's see if I can find it. Let's see. Project choice. Years. Some more. Well, I don't know where it is in here, but I can paraphrase it. Oh, wait, here we are. There we are. Yeah, it's hard to find because her memoirs really downplay all the things she did. What she said was, I speak for the women of Massachusetts, to say that I will never again wear anything made out of woolens, which is what the textile mill made, until, that we're woven at such a cost of misery. And according to a muckraker named Mary Heaton Vorse, her words helped end the strike. But especially because the group was, what time is it? Especially because the group was affiliated with the IWW, the Wobblies, a lot of parents of Wellesley students freaked out, wrote Wellesley demanding that this terrible radical be dismissed. And yes, she fought hard to keep her job, and she did. What they did say was that she shouldn't teach socialism literature anymore, and she didn't for several years, and she started again. What book besides her memoir of hers would you most recommend? Great question. Here's the thing. Scudder in person was funny and charismatic and pithy. Scudder in writing was not funny, charismatic, or pithy. She's pretty long-winded, kind of hard to get through. The book, which is an extended exploration of her feelings that Christianity and socialism had to be seen together, is called Socialism and Character. It's It's a slog, but it does contain the the all of her thought. Really good question. What would I recommend? I'll think about it. I'll think about it. A couple of books, The Church in the Hour, Reflections of Social Teaching of the Christian Year. Yeah, Church in the Hour, I think, was a transcription of a series of lectures. Social Teaching of the Christian Year might even be the same. Yeah, I'd say Socialism and Character as well. She wrote that in 1912. She thought it was her magnum opus, and it really does contain a synopsis of her thinking. Yeah, good. Okay. So starting in 1920, there was a Red Scare. People start calling her all sorts of dangerous things. The Socialist Party, for some reason, which was at the height of its influence in 1912, kind of disappears from the map. She's older. She retires in 1927. And she spends the rest of her life writing and working really hard in the Episcopal Church. She called it working within the church for the Christian Revolution. Let's see, what else can I say about her? There is a lot. I might open it up for questions in a while. Yeah, she was active until she was 92. She had arthritis. It was hard for her to get around, but she kept on writing. In her last book, which I think was published privately in 1952 or so, she talked about the dangers of nuclear weapons. She advocated for something which would become the European Union. She was remarkable at tackling the problems of her times, but she did so with a sort of distinctly progressive era emphasis. Later in life, she was a Franciscan scholar. Oh, yes, she was. She saw two Catholic saints as absolutely essential to her life. The first one was St. Catherine of Siena, and she wrote books about her. The second was St. Francis, and she wrote a biography of him. She wrote a biography. She wrote two novels that explored the life of Franciscans. Yeah. So what was I going to say? Yeah, there is so much to say about her. One other thing that you will see if you start Googling Vida Scudder online is Vida Scudder, lesbian this, lesbian that. And I have different feelings about that. When Scudder was young, marriage age, it was almost impossible for women to get married and retain their professional careers. It was also hard for people to find good spouses. Oh, there we are. Thank you. Perfect. And so women of the time who wanted to be active in the public sphere, retain their careers, not be devoted to homemaking and children at the expense of public life, they often settled down with other women. On the left is Vida Scudder in this picture. It's probably about the 1930s. On the right is her partner. Her name was Florence Converse. Scudder met her when Scudder was a young teacher at Wellesley and Converse was a student. And they stayed together from what photo? There we got it. And they stayed together until Scudder's death in 54. Converse was an editor and taught at Wellesley for a while, but mainly she was a very good editor. And she was a calming influence on Scudder, who was excitable and emotional. They had a very good relationship. Scudder did not talk about it much. She made it clear in her memoirs that it was not a sexual relationship, for what it's worth. But the reason why I balk at tagging her as a lesbian is because when she started her relationship with Converse, it was not a term that anybody used. And same gender partnerships of women were accepted. That was how Scudder and most of her professor friends lived their lives. including Catherine Lee Bates, who wrote America the Beautiful, who wrote some really good love poetry to her partner, whose name was Catherine Coleman. So Scudder did not see herself as this thing lesbian, which became a term and became pathologized about 20 years after Scudder and Converse got together. It was part of her life. It was part of her friends' lives. It was seen as a good thing to have an intimate female companion when Scudder and Converse got together. So when she fought for the rights, she was certainly a woman, identified woman. Yes. And so scholars who talk about this use a bunch of different terminology. Women identified woman is one of them, intimate partners, but to use the term lesbian, I think, has connotations of marginalization and sexuality that I don't really think work for Scudder. Yeah, Florence Converse was Society of Companions of the Holy Cross. She was really religious too. Let me think. I might open this up for questions because as I say, I could go on and on about Scudder for years. And whatever questions you have, I'm happy to answer them. Liz, got any? She would be very proud of Wellesley today. Oh, yes, she would. Indeed. Okay. No questions yet? Let's see. Tell us the story of Scudder with the purse. I don't know the story of Scudder with the purse. That's a good question. I know that picture was taken in front of the retreat house in Adelanrude up on the North Shore of Boston. Yeah, you can see the dark wood of Adelanrude. I do not know. I like this picture because most other pictures of Scudder, it's just kind of her head on up. Yeah, it's just a nice picture of an old lady. Oh, that's a really good question. Was she interested in the issue of women's ordination? She was not. I don't know if she knew Maud Royden. In fact, I don't know Maud Royden. Scudder was very accepting. She lived so long. Oh, yeah. Okay. Scudder was very accepting of where she was. And she didn't, how do I put this? She used her means of influence, her writing, her rhetoric, her position within the church with all of her might. She did not push for the vote, partly because she thought that anyone you could vote for would not be progressive enough. She always voted socialist when she got the vote, Norman Thomas. And she didn't talk about women's ordination. Yeah. And of course, she died 22 years before it happened. So 22, something like that. Yeah. It was 1976. Yeah. So Scudder and the Purse, I don't know. She went up to Adelanrude as long as she could eventually. I think it must have been arthritis. She talks about not being able to move very much. So she stayed at home and wrote tons of letters and tons of articles. The addition to her autobiography, which is called, what is that thing called? Hobbies and Interests, Prayer Life. Okay. The addition to her autobiography isn't so much about her life. It doesn't talk about her life after 1937. Ooh, this is great. I love these questions. But the addition to her autobiography does talk about her feelings about nuclear weapons and about world unity and the European Union and all sorts of things, which she never would have dreamed about, in 1861. Yeah, good. Hobbies and interests. She was she was completely devoted to social justice, but she also loved hiking. She and Converse had a summer house up in New Hampshire, Shelburne, New Hampshire, and she talks about hiking in the mountains. There's this really cute letter where a friend of hers reminisces about seeing her, about when Scudder and Converse were hiking around in the woods, and she saw something that she thought was a wolf and they ran as fast as they could away from it. It turned out to be a coyote. Um, so she loved that. She loved Europe. She loved going to Italy, and seeing art. Not much of a musician. She loved her garden. She loved her flowers. She loved her cats. Um, she had an extraordinary number of friends who came to visit her a lot. Um, Prayers, what do we? Mm-hmm. Oh, what a great question. What contributed most to her progressive thinking and activism? John Ruskin, is what motivated her. Um, Her mother read many early Christian socialists like Frederick Denison Maurice and and um and Thomas Carlyle. And so she read those too, and they influenced her. Um, she What didn't influence her, which is interesting to me, is actual experience with marginalized groups. She was a person of privilege. In fact, that was one of the reasons she was drawn to places which were so unlike her own experience. Yeah. Um, how would she advocate for social issues in this climate? That is a really interesting question. Um, Towards the end of her life, she was always a member of the NAACP, I think, but she didn't really focus on that until the end of her life, um, when civil rights started to become prominent. And apparently she um, was keynote speaker at a conference at Adeline Root about racial justice. I'm not sure what she said. There isn't a copy of what she said, but it's fascinating. Um, how would she advocate for social issues in this climate? Oh my word. I love that question. I'm going to have to think about it more. I mean, surely, and I don't want to get explicitly political now, um, but I don't think she would have liked what's going on, that's for sure. I think today, of course, she would. Oh man. Yeah, she would have been, what would she have been doing? Well, you know what she probably would have been doing? She was such a great speaker. She would have been leading rallies. She would have been leading rallies. She would have been firing people up. And she would have founded some groups. I'd like to think that they would. Yeah, I'll have to think about that. You know, it might end up being the last chapter of this book or part of it. What else do we got? What would you what would you ask or say to her if you could speak to her? I think I will pause and take a breath. Thanks. Yeah, I'm just going here. Oh, you know, she would have gone longer than Cory Booker. That woman could go nonstop. What would you ask her, say to her? That is such a good question. Mm. You know, it's interesting. I've been reading and writing about Vida Scudder since about 1998. But I never felt as if she was a living presence or my friend. I wish she were. I wish she were. She would have been a wonderful mentor. But I've always had to think of her as somebody on paper. I've talked to one person and many years ago, a very old SCHC member who knew her, but who couldn't remember anything. Did you feel optimistic about the future? She was always optimistic about the future. Um, Hang on, I'm going to go back to my files and read you some stuff. These are things I found in the archive in Adeline Rood. Lines at Adeline. All right. Um, Oh yeah, here it is. So this is a letter dated Epiphany 1953. So she's about 91 at this point. She wants to talk about, quote, the confused and bewildering situation which we confront. These times are full of vitality and charged alike with menace and promise. She said, and what a world crisis, I have to linger. I enjoy it. So I love that. So she did manage to somehow find optimism in everything. Tell us about your process in writing your book. Okay, so my particular emphasis within my major, my English major at University of Texas, was rhetoric and composition, which meant that I was studying the history of teaching composition in colleges and also looking at people's persuasive speech. And the chapter I was given to read was about her teaching at Wellesley. And so that got me started. I analyzed her rhetoric in my dissertation, and I talked about her teaching. Had an article published called Service Learning 1912, I believe. No, 1902, because that's when I published the article in 2002. And then as I started teaching college, I kept writing about her. And so I published articles about the process of writing about somebody, like Vida Scudder, one about her rhetoric to college women, one about a groundbreaking group of immigrants and well-heeled Bostonians that she put together, called the Circolo Italo-Americano, where the immigrants and the Americans were relating on a basis of equality rather than the Americans being paternalistic. And I decided nobody has written a biography of this woman. I need to do it. I think my problem right now is actually I have too much material. I've actually been back east several times. I have, man, I have hundreds and hundreds of draft pages. I need to put it together. And the University of Massachusetts Press, I sent them a sort of a little prospectus some years ago, and they said they were very interested. They wanted a couple of chapters. I need to get them those chapters. I've been busy. I wrote some books for Pearson Publishing. I love teaching ESL as a second language, so I'm doing a lot of that. But anytime I have spare time, I'm in the coffee shop working on this thing. What else do we got here? More questions?
Okay, would it be okay if I just kind of went through and showed the slideshow again so
Yep,
people can see those pictures?
please do.
Right. Okay, and I'll start from, let me go, we've got her name there. And
Who is she? Oh, that picture is her college graduation picture
oh, okay.
from her college yearbook, basically.
And she graduated from Smith College, is that correct?
Graduated from Smith in 1885. She
Okay.
started teaching in Wellesley in 1887.
All right. Then I'm going to skip down to this one. And do you know
Okay.
about this picture?
I love this picture because I think it's her faculty picture from Wellesley, so it would hang there somewhere. And it shows her as a late middle-aged, pleasant-looking woman. You know, it's probably how a lot of her students saw her. I don't know when that one's from. She graduated. She retired in 1927, so maybe mid-20s. Yeah. And that's the picture with the purse. I don't know what's going on there or how old she was. She's standing up, which means she could still stand up. I like what she's wearing too. It's kind of nice to see the change from, 1885 wear to 1930 wear. Okay, what else do we got? and that's Vida and Florence. I think they're sitting in their garden in their house in Wellesley. Converse lived for many years after that. She died in her mid-90s, but she was suffering from dementia, and I don't know where her papers are. I wish I could find them.
Okay, there's a lot of information here.
Yes,
When
there.
you think about her and her involvement in the church, is there any kind of salient theme to what you felt she was trying to do within the Episcopal Church?
Absolutely. Let me read what she wrote. Look at this copy of her autobiography. It's kind of well worn. Here we are. Here's what she says. Okay. Well, she has a chapter called The Christian Revolution. She says to work within the church for the Christian Revolution. You know, ask me that question again.
What would you say were the salient themes to what she was trying to do within the church? It doesn't sound like she was really a woman of prayer. She
She
was
was a woman of prayer. She was a
oh,
woman.
she was.
Oh,
Okay.
she was a woman of deep prayer. She believed in intercessory prayer.
Okay.
But and there's a book about her theological beliefs called Beyond the Social Maze. I'm more focused on how do I put it? Her actions.
Right.
Yeah.
So her activities. Okay, well, that's a good clarification.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was wondering about that, her being affiliated with the um the Order of the Cross. I don't I don't know how to get those words together quite right.
No.
But that group and not about it. So I'm glad to hear that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my goodness. The grounding, as I think I said way early in this talk, the absolute grounding of her social activism was Christianity.
Okay.
She would say that the two, socialism and Christianity, were inseparable. She really read the Bible as mandating a social order in which rich and poor were, in which there are no distinctions between rich and poor, no distinctions between immigrant and Yankee, no distinctions between white and black. And she celebrated immigrants. She didn't want them to lose their culture. But she did not believe in, she did believe that everybody should, I put this, yeah, well, what I wrote here was Scudder saw the Holy Trinity as the model for what the world should be. People in the world are distinct human beings, different ethnicities, genders, races, cultures, beliefs, backgrounds, but they should be equal as well, not discriminated against because of any differences. And she made that point copiously in, numerous speeches and articles.
Was she paid for her speaking that she did, or was she an advocate who was in a leadership position that that
Was she paid?
that led her to do this as part of the organizational work.
I don't think she was ever paid. She had family money, and she had income from her teaching. She never mentions being paid for it, but she was an extremely in-demand speaker. Good question. Good question. Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I don't see anything else that's here. There's a thank you for your presentation. And we showed the photos again. Is there any last word that you have?
Stay tuned. This book will come out eventually, and I hope it, okay, I've got one last quote on this one.
Okay.
That I hope the book will do. And this is, it so happens that Horace Scudder, the editor of the Atlantic Monthly for a long time, wrote a book about his brother, David, who was Vida's father. And it's a biography of his short life. And here's what he said in that. Hang on 2 secs. Again, I have so many things here that it's hard to find exactly what I'm looking for. But the gist of it is, it's hard to write a book, a biography to show the essence of a person. My main aim is to make the reader feel as if they had known that person. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
This woman is worth knowing. I want everybody to know about her.
Yeah. She sounds like just absolutely a fascinating woman.
She was amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, this is great. Oh my gosh, that's the nicest thing ever. You need not indulge me, but I rather believe she's smiling at you across time. Human to human, woman to woman. I am going to cry. That's so nice. Relationship with her mom, close, very close. Her mom was her rock. Mom never got married, never remarried. I don't think widows usually did. So her mom lived with her until her mom died in the mid-20s, in her 80s. She says her mom was calm, loving, affectionate, loved art, gentle, never quite understood the social activism, but she accepted it. All right, y'all.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Opened a chapter on a name that I've heard but never knew anything about. So I appreciate that. And I'm hopefully others know much more about her as a result of your research and your sharing. I'd like to encourage everyone to come back next week for our last lecture. It's going to be on medieval mystics from Ireland. And I think the Reverend Dr. Robin Neville from the Diocese of Florida will be giving that talk. And she is going to be a great rounding out of the series. Thank you so much for today. It was just really lovely to learn about this woman and to hear the things that you've been working on. You can tell you're passionate about this. You're surrounded by quotes and books and it's right there.
Yeah, I think I'm going to order another copy of her memoirs. It will be my third. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And
I'd just like to just tell everybody that we are glad that you've come and we welcome you back next week and hope that you enjoyed learning about Vida Scudder today. Thank you.
Thanks.